What historical event has not, but should be, made into a movie? The story of the Pan Am flight that got caught in New Zealand at the start of World War II and couldn't fly back home by going east because it was too dangerous. So instead they took their flying boat and flew west on routes they had to figure out from maps pulled from borrowed encyclopedias, dodging the Japanese, and trying to find enough fuel to keep the plane going. The whole thing took months, culminating in taking off from a river in the Congo and having to skim along through a canyon to build up speed since they were too heavy in order to even have a chance of crossing the Atlantic. The whole thing is tailor-made for TV or a film. There's a fantastic book written about the whole story called The Long Way Home and was written with the captain of the flight. FedEx Flight 705, TL, DR, man tries to hijack plane to get insurance money to send kids to college. Crew fight back. Jet basically turns into weapon for them. The backstory of the hijacker Tilda was a tragedy very unfortunate Tilda never fell into his favor. Auburn Calloway was a Stanford graduate who loved his family, but couldn't afford to send his kids to college. He used his experience as a Navy pilot, and the location of Memphis to grab a job at FedEx. He was frustrated at the fact his life amounted to only flying airplanes, when he could have so much more potential. Calloway then devised a plan to die in a plane crash, so that he could send his insurance money to his ex-wife, so that his kids can go to college. He was going to be the flight engineer for the same flight, but the day before he falsified flight hours by a single minute, so he was on the verge of unemployment. On April 7, 1994, he packed a spear gun and hammers to disguise the hijacking as an accident. His plan was to turn off the flight recorder, and then incapacitate the crew with blunt force trauma. Since investigators would rule out that they died from the force of hitting the ground, he would use the spear gun as a last resort. He would put the weapons in a guitar case, to not arouse suspicion. This took place before 9/11, so he just walked through without looking suspicious. He boards the flight, gets acquainted with the crew to lower their guard, and waits. 19 minutes into the flight, he walks into the cockpit, and hits everyone with hammers. First Officer Jim Tucker was rendered unconscious. The other two crew, Captain David Sanders and Flight Engineer Andre Peterson, get off of their seats to stop Calloway, but he threatens them with the spear gun he got from the back. Here's the crazy part: Calloway fucked with the wrong crew. Peterson grabs the gun, and starts to wrangle it away. Sanders joins him in trying to stop Calloway. Tucker, still dizzy and disoriented, realizes the situation, and goes back to what he learned. Ex-Navy, Vietnam vet, he knows a thing or two about planes. He treats the jet like it's a fighter aircraft, turning it 140 degrees, basically, upside down. It pushed the bounds of what an DC-10 could do. There's a fight in the cargo hold between two injured crew members and a man who had nothing to lose, and a half-conscious pilot who is treating the jet like a fighter, flipping the plane upside down so that his crew could overtake the hijacker. They take a U-turn back to Memphis, emergency landing, about a mile above the ground. The problem is that the plane is too heavy, too fast, and too high. There's a real chance adrenaline will impair their movements and overshoot the runway. They land. SWAT arrest Calloway, and everyone is sent to the hospital. The damage that Calloway has done to the crew unfortunately makes the crew not able to fly commercially again. The plane is still in service, but it was upgraded, without the flight engineer position. I learned about this in this plane investigation series on YouTube, and it astounds me how this literally has never been turned into a movie. Edit. Here's the Wikipedia link for the flight. Here's the video that I learned it from. I need a Coen Brothers movie of the 1904 Olympic Marathon. Every sentence just keeps getting more bonkers. Syndrome K. In 1943, a hospital in Rome located next to a Jewish ghetto let Jews fleeing Nazi raids hide there. The professors in charge admitted Jews under the fake diagnosis of Syndrome K, described as a highly contagious and dangerous disease. This successfully kept the Nazis out of the quarantine wards and the Jews safe for the duration of the war. That time where nothing never happened in 1989 in Beijing, China. The time John Adams and Benjamin Franklin were in France trying to gather support for the revolution and all the shenanigans they got up to. The cold case of who murdered Ken Rex McElroy. It is prime material for a dark comedy. This dude was such an unrelenting piece of shit, buried beneath the prison-type scumbags, and terrorized a small rural town his whole life. He'd get away with it every time because he'd intimidate the fuck out of anyone who sought to press charges against him. Implicated in rape, arson, assault, etc. So yeah, no tears shed for that psychopath. Anyway, there was a town meeting to discuss what to do with him because everyone was sick of his shit. The sheriff told them to just avoid him and set up a neighborhood watch to keep track of him. Right then they found out he was drinking at a bar. Sheriff told them to leave him alone and go home, but he had other shit to do, so he left the county. So what do these people do? They go to set up that neighborhood watch. Neighborhood watch, this man died. Over 60 people travel to the bar. Ken is at where they crowded him as he drinks and slings insults. He goes to his truck where his underage wife is sitting in the passenger seat. Talks some more shit and reportedly was going to grab a gun. So over 60 people must subscribe to the theory that a bad guy assumes room temperature only when well ventilated because he then got lit up. Unknown the number of shooters, but there were 2 separate calibers identified from the rounds found in his body, and both were popular hunting rounds. To this day his murder is unsolved because all 60 plus won't say shit. The FBI showed up to help investigate and still everyone kept tight-lipped. One person told them Thai boy needed to kill him. So yeah, prime material. A biopic on Hannibal would be really good. The visuals of crossing the Alps with elephants would be stunning. Robert Smalls, a black slave that stole a Confederate transport ship, freed the slaves aboard, and sailed it to the Union to be converted into a warship. Oh, and then he became a congressman in South Carolina. The Lioness of Brittany, medieval woman who led brutal attacks by land and sea against the French king in vengeance for the execution of her husband. Apollo 8. Basically the mission was originally only supposed to be a test of the lunar module in Earth orbit. But rumors were circulating that the Soviet Union were going to attempt to send a man into lunar orbit. Spoiler, this was not happening. As a result, Apollo 8 was switched to being the first mission to the moon. Not to land but to orbit. And this decision was made only 6 months before the scheduled launch date. So it was a race to get everything ready before the flight. It's a historic mission that is almost never talked about, compared with Apollo 11, which is much more well known. The Nihau Incident. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, a Japanese Zero was damaged by anti-aircraft fire and crash-landed on the remote Hawaiian island of Nihau. The Hawaiians, initially unaware of the attack on Pearl Harbor, treated the pilot with generosity and respect. After news of the attack came out, the pilot was placed under guard. With the help of some sympathetic locals, the pilot broke out and took 2 hostages, Ben Kanahele and his wife Ella. Later that night, Ben and Ella decided to fight their way out. Ben was shot 3 times, but still had enough strength to lift the pilot over his head and throw him into a brick wall. Ella, thinking her husband had been mortally wounded, killed the pilot by bashing his head in with a rock. Both Ben and Ella survived the incident, and Ben was awarded 2 medals for his actions. Ella, who actually killed the enemy combatant, received no formal recognition. Oops, this was made into a movie, Enemy Within 2019. Not really history, but retelling the Epic of Gilgamesh on the silver screen would be awesome. The Goyanas Incident. Dad stole a radiotherapy capsule from an abandoned hospital, didn't know what it was and opened it. The Battle of Castleder. One of the final battles of World War II, which involves a U.S. tank division teaming up with Austrian resistance fighters, a German army major and a high-ranking member of the SS to protect and free high-ranking French prisoners from loyal Nazis in a medieval Austrian castle. Seriously, it sounds like a random alt history DLC from a Call of Duty game, but it actually happened. I know we have like 8 million World War II movies, but how this hasn't been made yet still boggles my mind. Unless it's covered in the various movies about Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth's 12 Days on the Run are really damn interesting in my opinion. The construction of the pyramids in Egypt, either Snefru, who built 3 pyramids during his lifetime, or his son Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid. Anything related to Mesopotamia, like the rise of the Akkadian Empire or Babylon. I can't recall any historical movie at all set in that location. Epaminondas and the Theban hegemony. The conflict between Gaius Marius, Julius Caesar's uncle, and Sulla, Mithridates. The crisis of the 3rd century and the Roman century, which broke the empire in 3 states. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in the 13th century, a coalition of Spanish kings led by Richard the Lionheart's brother-in-law defeated the radical Almohads, which basically was the turning point of the Reconquista. The defense of Cartagena de Indias by Admiral Blas de Lezo in the 18th century. How about the greatest pirate in history? Besides the Napoleonic era, I feel 19th century France has a lot of potential for historical movies, due to how much stuff happens during that time period. If I had to pick one event in particular, it'd be between the birth of the Second Republic to the Second Empire. Battle of Jutland could use a modern movie depiction. Massive battle, day and night, high drama, tension, massive explosions. What more could you ask for? The year 1066 when the Vikings invaded England and then the Normans invaded England. Massive amounts of drama too. I always thought a big budget telling of the Donner Party would be pretty good. Not that low budget version from 10 years ago. I want epic. Nice try, Netflix content producers. You can't fool me into giving you a whole bunch of free ideas. Oh, wait. I'd actually want most of these to be made. As you were? I was about to say The Life of Thomas Cochrane, but looking it up, there's a movie starring Russell Crowe inspired by it. It's called Master and Commander. He basically was the craziest ship captain that ever lived. Maria Oktyabrskaya sold everything she had to buy a tank and kill Nazis after they killed her husband. If that's not a baller move worthy of a movie, I don't know what is. It's been battered around a few times in Hollywood, but the history of how the ancient Hawaiian Islands were united under one man to form the Hawaiian Kingdom is epic.